even to the point where a white person doesn't even have to interact with a black person or see a black person in the flesh and already have a view of what black people are, usually tied to negative stereotypes developed from white supremacy and perpetrated, right? Even to the point where Black children believe that about themselves. And that's why Malcolm's still so powerful. Because even back then, he's saying, don't believe these folks about what they telling you who you are. You ain't that. Who taught you to hate yourself, right? Who taught you to hate your hair? Who taught you to hate your nose, right? So much that you can't even talk to one another.
It is Freedom Friday and you are still not free. Well, friends, it's another episode of Freedom Friday and you're still not free, but hopefully you're going to be freer after this hour with Sharif and me. Today we are talking about Malcolm X Day. I've said for years, I've said for a very long time, wow, it's kind of weird that America has a MLK Day, but they don't have a Malcolm X Day. We don't get off work for it. We don't get to, have a day off, a day of service, a day to go to fancy banquets and have breakfast and all the MLK stuff we get to do. And that's because America don't love Malcolm X for some interesting reason. We're going to talk about that today because we got two experts, two radical leftist, socialist, commie Marxist individuals that seems to love Malcolm X for some reason. So let's talk about it, brothers. What do I need to know, first of all, about Malcolm X Day when I say we don't really have a Malcolm X Day? Apparently we do. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes. I mean, we definitely have a Malcolm X Day. We actually have two in one from one perspective. Many folks commemorate his martyrdom in February 21st. And then what's more widely celebrated internationally, mind you, is May 19th, which is his birthday. So that's been going on for years, but it's definitely been gaining steam in schools, outside of schools, in communities, in families, and people are recognizing. And the interesting part that we can get into is there's a little bit of pushback. There's a group that wanted to be nationally recognized. And there's other groups like, as soon as you do that, it's hijacked, keep it within us, our community. And so there's, a little bit of, just conversation and tension around that. But in the meantime, Malcolm X Day is here, and we are, wondefully positioned to continue to celebrate this leader. Ishmael, y'all been involved with Gabe and all that for a while, so go ahead, citizen.
Well, no. I was just going to ask, what is it about Malcolm X Day that you think makes it dangerous to refurbish him the way that they refurbished MLK? I mean, MLK was a radical. MLK was way more radical than people think, but they let him die. Now let him die. He did die, and then they killed him, and then they refurbished his image. But they haven't done that with Malcolm X. They killed him, but then they didn't refurbish him.
Yeah, I mean, I think they continue to be, I think part of the reason why they haven't refurbished him is because we haven't gone mainstream with it, with the celebrations, with the honor. It hasn't been a push for it. Even though he's been on a stamp, it was funny because it came after Public Enemy said most of my heroes don't appear on no stamp. A little while they were like, I think they heard that. This is before now we're like, hey, they listening to everything I say, and now it pops up on the ad. I think they heard that song. They say, hey, get Malcolm on the stamp right away. You know what I mean? And the next thing you know, here's Malcolm on the stamp. We're like, yo, how did this happen? So well, go ahead, Ish. You were about to jump in.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, for me personally, Malcolm X Day was something that, my mom let me stay home from school from when I was a child growing up. So I didn't know any different. Malcolm X Day was always just something that was part of the whole equation for me since I could remember. And I know that's not usual for most folks, but I think you can't cut Malcolm X's talks and make them less radical, kind of like you can with Martin King, right? So Martin King, you can find I have a dream and then cut out some of the other parts and remix it, right? You try to do that with Malcolm X. He's like, who taught you to hate yourself? You know what I mean? From the sun out to the sundown, Malcolm was just always on that. If anything, I think James Cone in his book, Malcolm, Martin in America, hit it on its head. Martin had to learn not all white people are salvageable, and Malcolm X had to learn not all white people are devils. And I think that like Malcolm at the end of his life got to that point, but at the same time, he was still very consistent in his critique of the white power structure, not just here in America, but even more so towards the end of his life internationally, which those words are still a threat to the white power structure that still exists today.
Yeah, it all applies still, nationally, internationally, locally in our communities, in our schools. It all is still reverberates, up until this very moment.
So we should walk through a little bit for the listeners and for people watching, just a little bit of Malcolm's life. So 1925, he's born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska, the fourth of Earl and Louise Little's 7 children. I did not know that he was one of many siblings. Earl is a Baptist minister, and he's a follower of Marcus Garvey's Black nationalism and serves as the Omaha chapter president of Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. So definitely Malcolm X comes from a family with some bona fides or some bona fides, and he wasn't just some random dude that, decided to get deep within the movement. He was already kind of born into it. 1926, he leaves Omaha and moves to Milwaukee. Now, what's really interesting about this is Omaha is a very white place. Milwaukee at that time, I'm sure, is very white because that's 1928. He goes from one very white place to another. November 7th of 1928, he has this seminal kind of experience. The house is burned down to the ground, and no fire wagon is dispatched to the scene when his house is burning down. And that was something that Malcolm later in his life came to believe was done by white supremacists. So this is an early kind of experience that he has. 1931, Louise has a premonition about her husband and asks him not to leave the house. Later that night, Earl Little is killed in what the police termed as a streetcar accident, but Malcolm later says that the Ku Klux Klan was behind it. So Earl's death, his wife and his children, after Earl's death, his wife and his children, they struggled. Again, these are kind of formative years for him. These are things that he's experiencing in formative years. So, he, I can't remember what year, I'm trying to look for it. He also moves to Michigan, which is another very white place, right? So, in his upbringing, he is experiencing what it's like to be the fly in the milk in multiple places. And I'm sure in his formative years, that is becoming an interesting part of his life. So I want to stop there because I think that's the formative years. Tell me, y'all, what happens to him in the portion of his years where he becomes what was it? Something red.
Detroit Red.
Detroit Red. So he becomes Detroit Red. Little known fact, he was friends with my favorite comedian of all time. Red Fox and Malcolm X were friends. When I first heard that, I was like, what? Because I love Red Fox. But so he had some bona fides, growing up in a Garvey household, but then he takes this turn. So tell me a little bit about that period of his life, if you guys can.
Well, I'll start off on that. I think that period in particular marked, what happens to a lot of Black youth. It's I remember going through something far less, crazy. Like he was going through it. But like the anger, the frustration, the disenfranchisement, just like the not being able to adjust to the space that's white supremacist laden, so fully, and you just see it everywhere. And at some point, I think a lot of people start, doing things that are, self-destructive in a way as they're trying to resist, right? And so it's almost like rebel without a cause type of syndrome. Until you find that cause, until you find the reason that you want to, because I still have that same rage, but now I channel it in this way that's fulfilling. But I remember during the time in my teenage years where I did not have the kind of maturity to connect my rage into the right type of outlet. And so it was just sparking everywhere and anywhere. So I think some of that was, part of Malcolm. But he was being exposed to far more, right? He was, what they call it, a porter. He was like working on the train. And so he was traveling and meeting all these people and getting off and going, to the club. So he was exposed to far more than he had before, right? You remember he was with his sister in Boston for a while, and she was a pretty, influential figure in his life, throughout. So I would say that was a part of it, this exposure, but also the anger and frustration of what America claimed it was and what the reality was. And that disconnect, we're often front and center to experience that firsthand and kind of in your face smacks.
So 1945, Malcolm moves back to Boston, as you just said, and he goes on a stealing spree with his black friend, Malcolm Jarvis, and 3 white women, one of whom he's dating. This is how you want to get put under the jail. In 1945, this is like when you really just don't want to go to jail, you want them to put you under the jail. 1946, Malcolm retrieves $1,000 worth, a $1,000 watch from a pawn shop and is arrested. This leads to kind of a string of interactions with criminal justice system. He's in jail from 1946 to 1952, I think. So 6 years between that time, and he's in more than one prison. He goes for parole in 51. He doesn't get parole. So he was experienced with the system in many different ways. And I think what you said, Sharif, is something that a lot of Black men for sure go through. Is there's a point at which you wake up and realize this is not your country, right? Like when you're a kid, you're in kindergarten, you're playing with toys and stuff. And then, first grade, you've got a little other stuff going. But there's a point in your life where you start to come figuring out why you're not in the books, why you're not the hero in the stories, why you are not, like, you are the afterthought to all the stories. And I think that's where rage is born, like in young people, like in the beginning, once they have that revelation and they kind of wake up and see that. Malcolm is the ultimate of that. Go ahead, Sharif.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but and I think it is even another layer to it. So it's one thing to be, not in the story. It's another thing to be constantly put in the story as an ape, as a savage, as running around Africa scared, and here comes, Tarzan, as the mammy chasing after Shirley Temple, after, everyone big eyes, you know what I mean? Like, the advertisement for, every product, and you looking, all, just cartoonish or, bedeviled. And, you know what I mean? Like it's one thing to be absent. It's another thing, like every time you see it, here's what they're saying they think you are, and they want you to believe who you are, right? Like that's on top of the erasure that Carter G. Woodson and many others would talk about. Is this other narrative of this is actually who you are. And, that kind of cognitive dissonance, you imagine growing up, Marcus Garvey, being a valedictorian of your, in school, but also being told like you have no real intellect to offer. Go work with your hands,
Ish. So in 1952, Malcolm is released on parole, and he joins the Nation of Islam. Help me understand that arc of that part of the life. Why are they so? First of all, why are they so successful in helping people immediately reboot their culture, reboot their self-belief?
Well, that's the thing. I think sometimes, especially because of the movie, kind of like that's people's main exposure to Malcolm X's life. His older brother joined the Nation of Islam first while he was in prison and tried to recruit his brothers and sisters. That's how Malcolm got exposed to the Nation of Islam while in prison. So it was actually his siblings already who were raised in the same household with the same Garveyite type values. But Malcolm was the younger brother. So like he had the base foundation somewhat, but like you said earlier, with his father being killed at a young age and his mother kind of losing kind of control of the family overall and the state jumping in and, committing her and splitting up the children, I think it speaks to Malcolm's disillusion. So like even just the whole arc y'all just went through with kind of like going out into the world and getting lost in the sauce, right? Being angry at something without having the way to express the anger or kind of a dismissal over what you're supposed to do. right? Because Malcolm even talks about it in the autobiography. In seventh grade, he was like top of his class. He wanted to be a lawyer. You know what I mean? He was like the pink poodle, how he described it, right, in his class as being the only Black student in there. And the fact that he got rejected from that and got disillusioned when his teacher said, that's not smart. That's not a job for a Black person to become a lawyer, right? That's not realistic. You see this disillusionment, and then he ends up dropping out of school. And that's when he moves with his sister. And then that leads him on the path which eventually gets him in prison. But when he was in prison, he actually then had an opportunity to kind of revisit it from an adult angle at a much older age with his brothers and even other siblings kind of telling him and putting him on, Elijah Muhammad is teaching us the real Black man's religion. And it's not coincidental that the Nation of Islam, a lot of its philosophy is kind of rooted in Garveyite type thinking. You know what I mean? It's just put that religious tinge on it with kind of like, this is the truth about the Black man in America. All that anger, all that rage that you're feeling, that you're talking about, that have gotten you to this point is because of this devil. And I think that, that spoke to Malcolm, that spoke to his siblings, you know what I mean? Even his younger brother becomes part of the Nation of Islam. And even when Malcolm leaves, a lot of them don't leave the Nation of Islam, which speaks to kind of like that deeply ingrained kind of values connected to kind of Garveyism and also Black nationalism in a general sense. So I think when folks are in prison and at the bottom and somebody says, this situation was created by this devil, this white man that is the opposite of everything which is light. And the only reason that this dark exists in your life is because these folks have taken that away. And I think that just speaks to kind of, and it's like, so you need to give up the white man's poison, stop drinking their alcohol, stop eating their, pork, and that just speaks to a kind of like an answer, like every religion does, quite frankly, but it speaks specifically to Black people in America. And I think that's really what the root kind of awakening, which still happens today, not on a large scale like Malcolm, but that speaks to folks.
Yeah, I think you lose a bunch of people when you start trying to get them off the pork, right? Like, y'all thought crack was bad. Sheesh. Crack ain't got nothing on bacon. Bacon is please stop. Ish and Sharif, can you guys both give me a quick lesson on the basis of the Garvey? I don't want to call it theology, but what's I casually passed through that they were Garveyites. What's the basis of Garvey's teaching?
Well, I would say two out of the things is one around self-determination, being able to define yourself, speak for yourself. And you see that train of thought recaptured in Kujichagulia, the Nguzo Saba and Kwanzaa, right? Like there's a common thread in this. The other big part is like just this Pan-Africanism, that our wins will be international wins. Our struggles are international struggles, and don't put yourself, whatever place where that boat stopped for most of us, wherever that boat stopped, don't think that is your new land. Your new land is old. It is thousands of years old, and that connectivity piece. So for me, those are the two of the, the biggest, two of the many lessons from the Garveyite theology.
Yeah, and I think like the emphasis of self-reliance, self-sufficiency also, right? And it's a lot of people don't know this, but if you really know the intellectual genealogy, Garvey was rooted in what Booker T. Washington was talking about. Actually even tried to visit the United States to meet Booker T, but Booker T. Washington died before he got here. And so that definitely greatly influenced kind of Malcolm and his family. When Malcolm's daughter wrote the book, Malcolm Little, the children's book, talks about like the little farm that they had. Malcolm X's dad built their house with his own hands. And then that house was burnt down because he built it in the white side of town. And they didn't want him to live in the white side of town. And he was defiant. You know what I mean?
Like how it looked. They're like, yo, like you built that? Like, oh no.
Exactly. And then going around, it's not even a deeper coincidence that Malcolm X's father was a preacher too, preaching from the pulpit, right? Christianity, right? Probably even having some white Jesus statue in the background, but telling folks they need to go back to Africa, that this ain't the place for the black man, right? And that even speaks, right, to the black nationalist thought of the Nation of Islam, that separation from white people is necessary in order to achieve freedom, that freedom will not be achieved with the white man basically on your neck and in their society, in their country. And it's just like a logical conclusion. Now, the thing that's really interesting is how Booker T. Washington's associated with this, but that's a whole nother conversation. But like when we're talking about how this developed, there's no coincidence that after Malcolm passes, the folks that claim his legacy the most were folks in the Black Power movement. And they claim that Malcolm was the very root foundation of their philosophical kind of orientation, even though they took on different types of orientations like, socialism, Marxism, and everything like that, and mixed some of those black nationalist thoughts with it. Malcolm definitely laid at the very center of kind of that type of sentiment. And that even internationalism in which Malcolm took it to before he got assassinated.
So when you think about his main thought product, so he's got Garvey in his background. It's in his world and in his mind. He's got the Nation of Islam. He's got the nation. So that's another set of kind of like black empowerment theology or thinking in his mindset. And then he becomes a one-man version of that himself, right? Like, because everything that he learns and he puts out in the world gets taken by what you just said, the Black Power movement, right? I want to point this out just for one reason, because we like to treat people in history as if they are one-offs. Like, there was Malcolm, and then there was Martin, and there was blah, blah, blah. And there is a body of Black thought. And Black thought has a logical thread going through it from the beginning till now, right? So you mentioned Booker T. We talked about him before. You mentioned Du Bois. We've talked about him before. But they're not the last, and it keeps going on and on and on. So today we're talking about this era, which is the Malcolm era, like what happened in the life of this man. God put him here for a reason, and he fulfilled his reason for being here in his lifetime, but it didn't end when he died, and it didn't start when he was born, right? So we're talking about this period of time. We talked about Garvey. We talked about Nation Islam. What was Malcolm's contribution overall to Black thought? What was the unique part that he added?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of, he's, even as a child, man, he was just so compelling to me, and he remains like my kind of North Star, in this space. I think, and for two reasons, I think, one, I think he had this level of discipline and spirituality kind of combined with the fire. The amount of times that they were trying to, find dirt, drag him, cancel, that was unable to do that. I think another thing that really compelled me, and I think this was probably the first part and the most enduring part, was his love for humanity, his love for Black people, his love for community. All of that was so, and then again, all of the folks had, as you said, like this intellectual genealogy, this cultural lineage, all of that has that imbued in it. But and so I think that was another part, and I think the other part that sticks out to me, and again, it's not, again, as you said, it's not new contribution. There's an added layer of this international component. Not only was he saying like, Pan-African, but, one of his sheikhs that he would meet with was from Iraq, and he had a relationship with Iraqis. And, I couldn't help but to think of like, okay, what was happening later with American invasion of Iraq, and how would he frame this and think about it, Vietnam War, Korean War, like all of these kind of things. He was, remember, Dr. King kind of came late on to, publicly condemning the Vietnam War, right? Like, because I think what Malcolm also added was like this kind of independent thinking, which allowed him to also continue to evolve in that moment. As opposed to like, well, we need to talk and strategize, and like that kind of playbook of like, all right, what's the best strategy? Where he's like, what's the truth?
Sharif, let me ask you a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
And Ish, you can jump in on this too, because y'all both about to get like mad at me or whatever, it's okay. I don't know if you will actually, but Sharif, you've said a lot of times that many people are not trying to end white supremacy; they're just trying to improve their position within it. Right? You've said that quote to me like multiple times. Would it be fair to say that Martin Luther King Jr., coming from a middle class Black background, who just wanted the rights that he thought that they should have when he was coming up and growing up, was really trying to get a better position within white supremacy for Black people by thinking through integration? And Malcolm, from the first tenet of his belief is you got to build your own. No, this is about nation building. This is about world nation building. This is about creating, like, that's the Garvey strain. The Garvey strain really is do for self, build your own, create your own banks, Black nationalism, right? Like create a nation. We're nation building. And Martin's was, no, we're not nation building. We're within a nation already. Like we are building within a nation. I guess the unfair thing I'm asking is, doesn't that feel a little bit like one of them was trying to improve their position within white supremacy, and one of them was trying to confront white supremacy with Black power?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would phrase it a little bit different. I think I would, like what's.
I knew you would.
Because I do think Dr. King wanted to end white supremacy. I think how he thought it would go about was different. I think how he thought about, if America could morally shift to such a degree where everyone who is here would be looked at as full human beings, and I think you see his evolution around that, like, oh yeah, I'm an integrationist, but don't send those Black kids to those white schools, like, I'm an integrationist for this public spaces. We pay taxes here or we shop here or whatever, but then eventually, like, hey, you know what? I think we're integrating our people into a burning house, right? And so you saw that where Malcolm started on that other side. But, again, as Ish talked about, like, it was evolution. At first, it's like, yo, you white, you devil, I ain't got no time for you. White co-ed saying like, hey, I want to help. You can't do nothing for me, miss. Then later, it's like, hey, you know what? You can help. Get your people. Flip the table at Thanksgiving. Direct all of your, your hand wringing and sad singing about, oh, like, do this. Start with your family, then start with your, so right. So even all of it is still this collective thought. Just like we say, to really understand Black thought in their earlier time, W.B. Du Bois, Booker T, and Marcus Garvey together, you understand Black thought. I think with Malcolm and Martin, it's the same thing. I think, and what Stokely Carmichael used to say was like Dr. King's biggest thing was he really thought that their morals would get them to change laws and things like that, right? Where we learned later from Derek Bell, it was, our international strategy and how we're portrayed, we can't have Bull Connor, sicking dogs and little children. So let's fix and address. It was an interest convergence, not necessarily this kind of like, you got the hat on, come to Jesus moment. Now I'm a better person and we're going to be a better country. It was never that. Malcolm just called that out much sooner.
Were rank and file Black folks feeling Malcolm in his life?
Rank and file Black folks. Well, it's two rank and files. Some rank and files, they ain't feeling none of this. They ain't like King. So if they thought King was too radical and moving too quickly, Malcolm, they were like, yo, why did this troublemaker done come down in there? But there's another group who actually adored him, loved him. I've told this story a million times. When my mother was a teenager, she would go to her aunt's house, her mother's sister, Mariam. And this woman, Aunt Mariam, would be listening to records. And my mother would hear this voice, this message, and she would say, like, you know what? All the things that I was struggling with, what we started out with, like this rage and seeing this, and, she was like, he helped bring clarity to it. She was like, he brought such precision to what the confusion was cutting through all the noise. And she was like, I latched onto that as a teenager. And then later I started to understand, oh, this is Malcolm. Oh. And I think what she, and the amount of people that I meet who talk about this journey of how Malcolm captured their mind and their heart with clarity, with international. I met these people in Iran. I met these people in the hood. Like, they talk about the message that he was bringing and as we talked about, he made it so plain, yet it talked about the most sophisticated, vile attempts to subject us to oppression. And he broke it down in such a way that it just inspired. And as Ish said, from Stokely to Black Power movement to many, many others, like it has ignited something that continues to rage internationally in Black thought.
Yeah, I mean, he laid the foundation almost, right, to the modern. I always say, like, the civil rights movement in the '60s. You're starting to get to the pinnacle of Black struggle in this country. You know what I mean? Of course, there's moments of time where there are other, Black struggle, but this is like after Reconstruction. This is as Jim Crow is supposedly being dismantled, but also at the same time, internationally, there was also movements overthrowing off the yoke of colonialism, and all this was happening to make this moment that Malcolm came up in and actually gains national prominence at the same time very powerful. Remember, Malcolm is also 5 years older than King. So King was raised, he went to college at 15. He was bred to be kind of that leader that would bring Black people to the promised land type thinking, right? Off of somewhat of the intellectual model of Booker T a little bit, if we're talking about Black communities in the South, right? But then at the same time, Malcolm was just like, didn't believe it. He already was operating from a position and a positionality and a context was like, this is nonsense. All the stuff they telling you, all the stuff about you being inferior, they're the ones being inferior because the way they talking about this situation, the way they treat you. And Malcolm was very clear on that. And that clarity over time and his intellectual honesty led Malcolm, I would argue, to be one of the most influential Black political thought folks in generations, right, in this society, because his thinking influenced not just here, but everywhere. When I was in Zanzibar a couple years ago, some old brother stopped me. He's like, Malcolm X, like, how does a brother in Zanzibar know who Malcolm X is? You know what I mean? But like, that is the reach, the thinking, and everything that was involved in it. And it influenced everybody. So like, when we talk about who did Malcolm X speak to? He spoke to folks who didn't believe in themselves, that felt that rage, like, Sharif was just saying, that when he spoke, you're like, wow, you know what? You're right. You just articulated what I knew in my gut, but never had a chance to think about and never been exposed to. And even like for even Malcolm's own journey within the nation, navigating that in the book, The Dead Are Arising, which I strongly suggest everybody read, by Les Payne and his daughter, Tamara Payne, finished it. In the book, he talks about Malcolm's initial alienation with the Nation of Islam is them working with the Klan. And that Elijah Muhammad had relations with the Klan and thinking that that was like the secret white government and that's who you negotiated with. And that started the long spiral towards him eventually exiting and becoming bigger than the Nation of Islam, and recognizing that although he does really believe in those things and hoping that he can change it, all the things pushing him out eventually just led him to the conclusion that these folks is hypocrites too. What is the true way? What is the true way of approaching these type of issues and things? And I think that's what makes Malcolm extremely influential in the way people think about society, think about what needs to be done, to think about Pan-Africanism, right? To think about solidarity.
I think this is in line with what you were just saying. There was a clarity about Malcolm that I found like years ago that was more clear than everybody else that was, kind of on my docket to read, right? Like the clarity. But the thing with him was that he was a step beyond where we were thinking to go. So whereas like Dr. King and others were doing what a lot of people do today is they talk about decolonizing things. They talk about anti-racism, which is all kind of, those are all defensive kind of things that you do. But what happens after you win that battle? Critical consciousness is what happens after that. When you become free, you're no longer decolonizing, you're building with the world as it should be. Right? Like you're building your own world. Well, he had a very clear vision of what it meant to be free as Black people, what it meant to be self-sustaining as Black people, which is beyond the, can we get rid of the racist laws? Can we, integrate? Can we, do all the things that are really just the behavior that you have while you're still a slave, right? those are all the things you do well. You have to decolonize things because you're colonized, right? You have to fight racism. You have to be anti-racist because you're in the thralls of racism. Let's say you win. Let's say your anti-racism beats racism. It's over with now. Then what do you do? Well, then critical consciousness starts. That's when you start building something of your own. And there was a moment in which I think you touch on this issue. There was a moment in Africa where, not a moment, there were several moments in Africa where there was an independence movement and they were having to think that through. They were kicking people out of their countries, the colonists out of their countries. And there was all this excitement in Black world that something new could happen, something different could happen because we had countries, right? We had all this and they were becoming free. Do you think in his lifetime he thought he was going to see the freedom, like that because Africa was starting to see successes in pushing out, colonists and others, that he was part of a moment where it felt like we really could win, not just in the United States but globally? Do you think that was part of his thinking? And then I would ask you guys what happened, right? Like, how come we didn't get free, bro? Like, what happened?
Well, I would definitely say that, and just off the jump, I think Malcolm tied, especially, towards the end of his life, tied the Black freedom struggle in America to freedom for Black people around the world, and freedom really, quite frankly, for oppressed people around the world. And he recognized that would only be possible with that type of solidarity of colored folks and oppressed people around the world. And I think that his OAAU, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which was modeled off of the Organization of Africa Unity, right, speaks to kind of that vision. Also, and this is where, not to trash the movie because Spike Lee did an all right job with the movie, but they emphasize his trip to Mecca, right? Malcolm visited over 20 or 30 African countries. You know what I mean? And that's why that Dead or Horizon book is so good, because he even talks about visiting Nkrumah and trying to convince him to support a UN resolution condemning the United States for racism, right? Officially on the UN body. And then in the book, it says Malcolm left despondent after that conversation with Nkrumah. And I think that this complicated reality and weaving that he was trying to do when the international white supremacist structure was still kind of in place speaks to Malcolm's clarity and also threat. The folks around the world, the white power structures around the world were threatened by Malcolm's ability to unite folks, unite oppressed people and speak to that. And, there's no coincidence. He had a plan to have that resolution presented to the UN. He got assassinated, what was it, a couple weeks before that was supposed to happen. And that just speaks to how clear he was that the only way Black people will get free in America is if everybody is free around the world.
Mm-hmm. Do you still believe that?
I do.
I do. Yes.
Yeah. You do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think other people are feeling us like that in other parts of the world?
I think there are pockets around the world that they see it, even if they're unable to mobilize and actualize upon it. The understanding, just from my international engagement, has been there's never been a doubt that this global reach of white supremacy and international capitalism continues. It's a threat to the earth, it's a threat to humanity, and it doesn't matter what happened after the continental drift. It's coming for you.
When you think about what could be recovered from Malcolm's thinking in his life, well, let me back up. I did want to say this earlier, Ish, when you said you went to Zanzibar and somebody sees an X and they're like, oh, Malcolm X. So they know Malcolm X everywhere you go. This is kind of messed up. But there's a lot of places in Africa you could go if you were wearing a Lil Wayne t-shirt. They would be like, oh, Lil Wayne. Right? We used to export some good stuff. Well, now we exporting silliness.
Well, and we kind of touched upon this before, maybe even almost a year ago, right? After Malcolm, after Fred Hampton, after what that was, they're like, yeah, this ain't ever going to happen again. Like, we're going to control, we're going to dictate who the heroes are. Think about everybody after that, after the Panthers, right? You're talking about Jesse Jackson being held up as a Black leader. You're talking about not the trash folks, but I'm just saying in general. Barack Obama, right? You Oprah Winfrey, right?
Don't mess with Barack, bro. Don't mess with Barack Obama. We will have no blaspheming on this show.
but like, you know, like, but this is what I'm saying. Like, they literally have effectively made our leaders or our what Black culture is, even to the point where a white person doesn't even have to interact with a Black person or see a Black person in the flesh and already have a view of what Black people are, usually tied to negative stereotypes developed from white supremacy and perpetrated, right? Even to the point where Black children believe that about themselves. And that's why Malcolm's still so powerful. Because even back then, he's saying, don't believe these folks about what they telling you who you are. You ain't that. Who taught you to hate yourself, right? Who taught you to hate your hair? Who taught you to hate your nose, right? So much that you can't even talk to one another. Malcolm was talking that stuff. And when that's why it's so powerful. When I teach Malcolm, students are like, oh, wow, like that. I love Malcolm X because that's really what he is. And that's why they'll never be able to make a Malcolm X Day. They won't be able to make Malcolm X into Santa Claus. Like they did to King, unfortunately. And when you really do that, when you look deeper at King, even him, he realized what Malcolm was even saying towards the end of his life was the path, that it was tied to international struggle, that it was folks put together. And his Martin's disillusionment was expressed with just like saying, like, I try to tell y'all we need to change these values and we're not. And this whole thing's going to go down to hell in a handbasket eventually if we don't. Like, he was trying to warn folks, everybody. But Malcolm was already very clear, like, this is going to hell in a handbasket and that we need to link up with one another around the world and hold these folks accountable for creating some of the most wicked situations and systems the world has ever seen. I mean, even at the beginning of this call, like, Malcolm understood white supremacy so well that he could probably predict Donald Trump becoming president. He could probably predict schools in the South changing their name back to Confederate soldiers after they changed their names from Confederate soldiers. Malcolm was very clear on that wicked nature. But at the same time, he also understood that some people are people that could be changed. And there was also people who can be worked with as long as they're working for the cause of exploited people around the world, as long as they're working for the freedom of oppressed people around the world.
So I'm going to say something provocative now because we've been mostly agreeing with each other. So, I just want to so let me say this. Malcolm lost what Malcolm believed lost. And we are living in the aftermath of that loss. And if we are honest with ourselves, we are the slaves that he never wanted us to be. We are a commercial, militarized, self-medicating, stupid media consuming, anti-Black consuming and internalizing of messages, everything that he warned us not to be. You just said, who taught us to hate ourselves? We are consuming like a fire hose now of all the kind of daily kind of diet of things, reasons to hate ourselves. The media, the music, the culture, all of it isn't even in our control. We don't even own it. We don't even own it. We don't own the sports that we play. We don't own the music that we make. We don't own the streams of our music that we make. I was looking up some things as you were talking. The hair industry is $3 billion a year, $3 billion in the hair extension market, and we have no stake in that, even though we're the number one consumer of fake hair. Why are we the number one consumer of fake hair? Because we hate ourselves. We hate our hair. We hate what's on our head, right? Somebody taught us along the way that flowing in the wind hair was worth us, number one, jacking up our scalps, right? Burning our heads off in some cases, right? With the weaves and the relaxer and all that. Somebody's going to come after me for what I'm saying right now, but I am telling the truth. We tell young Black girls something. We tell young Black boys something. They internalize it like cultural poison. It is fratricide, what we do to our young people and to each other when we put these messages with each other around. The skin whitening cream business. What is that? That's like $8 billion a year globally. Skin whitening cream, $8 billion a year, right? Anti-Blackness globally is so bad that dark Mexicans, dark Indians, dark people of every group buy skin whitening supplies. Why? Because you hate yourself. You hate your skin so badly. You have so internalized the propaganda, the white supremacist propaganda that creates a hierarchy of beauty, a hierarchy of intelligence, a hierarchy of normalized thought, like what can be normal, and we have succumbed to it all. Hip hop. I just mentioned this is where y'all really good because we talked about this before. I know y'all love you some hip hop. Corporate hip hop is the devil. Corporate hip hop is the opposite of what Malcolm was telling us to think about ourselves. Corporate hip hop hates our women. Corporate hip hop hates our intelligence. Corporate hip hop hates our living beyond age 18. Corporate hip hop wants us to be in jail. Corporate hip hop actually makes us lionize our misery, right? And put it on wax and make some people rich as examples by feeding us that. They're like the pimps. They're cultural pimps. They sell us our own kind of trafficking and enslavement, right? So, anyways, all of that I just said is me doing a closing argument on Malcolm Lost. What Malcolm wanted us to believe, number one, he wanted us to love ourselves. He wanted us to believe that we were beautiful, that we were at the top of the key of beauty, that we were on the top of the key of intelligence, that we invented civilization, that we don't have to live like we're renting on somebody else's property. This is what Malcolm wanted us to believe, and this is what he wanted us to teach our children. And we are teaching our children something very different than that every single day. Number one, by what we put in their ears and what we put in their head and what we let them watch. It's destroying them before they are even self-actualized in many cases. All right, I rest my case. Now, what do you say, brothers?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'll start off, and then Ish. Listen, 99% of what you said is 100% accurate. But you started,
no, 100%.
you started from the wrong premise.
Okay, let's hear it.
Malcolm did not lose. Everything that you talked about, that you laid out, is what he was teaching. And we can't think about this life, this world, this this human condition as a linear single race from start to finish. It is, have you ever seen those graphics of like what they say the Earth looks like in the orbit? And it's like real simple. It's like, oh, the Earth is rotating and it's rotating around the sun. And then the other, planet. But then when they actually show it, it is so much more complex than that, so much more, impactful, right? When you really see how the cosmos is moving. This right now that we're talking about like 500 years. What's the 500 years in the overall conditions of where we've been? And when we're talking about white supremacy in this angle, what Malcolm was also talking about wasn't just the white supremacy. He was talking about like the oppression in general, because you can find other people where they don't have this, and the human condition is always like, how can I oppress you? And what he would always say is like, teaching is like self-defense, self-determination, self-reliance, that's all combined. And so I would say like all of those things, yet what he spawned and the intellectual thought that he continued, again, it wasn't just his, it was this collection that he moved forward. That's that constellation that keeps going. Because just as you were able to talk about all the other things that he wanted us to teach, means that those are lessons that you learn. That means that right there, that's a win, right? Because we can't say each one teach one and then say if someone was taught, they lost. So not only each one teach one, it's actually each one teach 1,000. And you think about how many people have you got to pause to think and take off one chain off their brain shackles. You're able to do that, right? So that means that somebody is winning. Somebody prayed for this. Somebody worked towards this. Somebody is saying, like, unlink that chain. And even with that rant, it was accurate. It was internationally, locally, which means that those are all wins. Those are all wins.
That's such a good point. That's like a great point, because everything I said that came out of my mouth came out of what I learned over time growing up, right? So if you look at Franz Fanon, if you look at Malcolm, Martin, Garvey, keep going down the line. If you read that when you were young, like I did, and you read these things in your high school years, it forms everything that just came out my mouth. I didn't make that up. I didn't think those things for myself. So you're making like a damn good point.
The loss would have been if we had never heard of any of his teachings.
That's true. That's true.
How many
That's
people?
True.
That is one of the most popular books internationally, most translated, most taught. Ish and Abigail and a couple others are about to be Malcolm X fellows. And, because Brother Assad is Brother Assad has written 200, and we need to bring you in on this too, Chris, in some kind of fashion. Brother Assad worked with Dr. Yasser Shabazz and the Shabazz Center, the legacy of Malcolm and Dr. Betty Shabazz, and created 200 lessons on Malcolm X because he wanted people to make sure that they were clear. So Dr. Shabazz is going through it now and giving feedback and input to make sure it is as pristine as possible. And then that's going to be part of teachings around the country. That's going to be part of, I'll be at the Shabazz Center on May 19th this year, and around the country, around the world, people have Malcolm X Day, right? So these are wins. This is like, he can't be defeated because, as he said, truth can't be defeated. It can't be. No matter what, truth won't be defeated. And regardless of all the tricks, all the sellouts, all the noise, all the distractions, all the money used, to propagandize against it, truth will prevail in some way, some form, some fashion, right? And so, like, to me, this such a, not only is it a win, it is a massive collective ongoing win, but it's an ongoing struggle, right? Like, so that's the thing. Like, we don't want to celebrate too quickly. We don't want to despair. We just want to soldier on and make sure that we are passing the baton to the next group with a path that's more lit, more paved, and more conducive for the battles yet to come.
Okay, Ish, I want you to jump in on that and tell me why I was right with my case that I made there and everything. Yeah, I just want you to do it because Sharif didn't help me out. He just he tried to before I do that though, just let me say this because I want to keep getting myself in more trouble. What could we do for education, Black education, if we had $3 billion, right? If we had a Black endowment that was $3 billion, we spend $3 billion in hair, right? Like in hair. And don't talk about what we spend to Warner Brothers music and keep going down the list, Spotify and all that type of stuff, right? And meanwhile, you're trying to build a teacher pipeline. You could use some money to do some of the curricular things that you want to do and some of the programs that you could envision having after school or in school programs. What could we do with billions of dollars, right? Well, we have billions of dollars. We are spending billions of dollars on our own demise. Anyways, I'm sorry. I went back into my case again. All right, Ish, tell me why I was right.
Well, I mean, it is dire, right? And I'll be the first to admit that. But just to veggie back off of what Sharif just was talking about, I want to be who I am today without an experience when I was in elementary school where I experienced a racist incident with a teacher and the librarian heard about it and gave me the autobiography of Malcolm X. So like, I wouldn't be who I am today. I would have easily got lost. I probably would have easily not had the strong foundation intellectually to even navigate the situation where I'm at today. So the spirit of Malcolm is there. And I can tell you right now, a lot of the times folks aren't exposed. The only way folks are exposed to Malcolm, or the most way our children are exposed to Malcolm, is like Malcolm versus Martin. Martin was nonviolent, Malcolm was violent, and that's it. The students don't hear the depth of even what we're talking about right now. Parents don't hear the depth of what we're talking about right now. And when folks do, that spirit rises in them. And that is the powerfulness that they can't get away with. They can kill Malcolm. They can kill Fred Hampton, right? They can silence leaders and lock them up because they are the children of Malcolm, right? Which we still have political prisoners that call themselves the children of Malcolm locked up to this day. We still got Assata Shakur in Cuba escaping from this terror dome, right? And that will always be present. Free them all. And that's the power of Malcolm, you know, and the more you learn about what his legacy was, what he was trying to leave, the more that you start to learn the lessons necessary to get free. Now, is that going to happen next week? Is that going to happen like in the next 5 years? Probably not. But we have laid and are laying the groundwork necessary when this thing falls apart, because this thing ain't going to work. And you just said that, so I agree with that 100%. Right? This John's unraveling. And when folks need to look back and reach back into the well, it will be the children of Malcolm right there and be like, yep, Malcolm taught us this. We know that this is happening. This is why we need to start building our own. This is why we have to be honest with our babies about what the reality that they're facing now and be upright and stand up despite all the nonsense that they throw at us, right? Because at the end of the day, my favorite rappers talk about Malcolm. There's rapper artists that are still releasing music that rap about Malcolm. British rapper Low Key, who's doing tons of music right now, like #1 seller in England, references Malcolm X's legacy. So like when we're talking about the gravity of that, there are very few people in history, in world history, that kind of represent that spirit of defiance, that spirit of resilience, and that spirit of kind of like finding oneself while being lost, while recognizing that we always had the answer. It's in us all, and we just have to reach for it. And I think that even though what you described is right, at the same time, not knowing Malcolm will just cause people to internalize that and accept that as the reality, as the way it's supposed to be. Knowing Malcolm allows you to reject it.
Well, I know we got to wrap here soon, but as we wrap, I don't want to cut you off, Sharif. You say what you were going to say, but I want to like dispel any myths before we get out of this show. Any myths about Malcolm that we need to set the record straight on. I think we should do that before we end this show. Is like, let's talk about any myths and bust them right now before we get off this show. I do want to respond quickly and say everything you just said. I agree with Ish. At the same time, over the last week or so, much of our attention was on Drake and Kendrick having a stupid rap beef where two millionaires were pulling each other apart for our collective Mandingo fight curiosity, while the whole world is burning, right? The whole world is burning, and entertainment is killing us. Our entertainment addiction is taking up brain space. So I don't care about Kendrick and Drake. They're two Black capitalist millionaires who are having a great life pretending like they're not in their raps, in their hip hops. One of them, both of them, every other word is nigger, right? Who taught you to hate yourself, right? Who internalized the niggerdom for you, right? Who brought you to niggerdom to the point where you're a billionaire or millionaire now, and you're still selling us that poison as we're considering you to be super poetic and super smart. You got a Pulitzer. You got a Pulitzer Prize. One of them has a Pulitzer Prize. The other one's got so many awards and so much money, and they still can't beat niggerdom, right? And we're addicted, like a soap opera. Did you see what Kendrick did? Did you see what Drake did? Did you see what Kendrick? Nah, I didn't see that, because you know what? I was watching the world burn. Sorry. Shoot me an email and let me know what's happening with that, because y'all seem to be very, very excited about it. So much to you got to the point where you got two different teams. You got yourself wrapped up. I'm Team Drake. No, you Team Warner Brothers, fool. Shut up, right? You paying taxes to the empire, right? That's what you are. You are addicted to entertainment, and that is the opposite of what Malcolm would want us to have in our hard drive. Our hard drive is corrupted. It is corrupted with capitalist viruses that we don't even know and we can't even see. We got people walking around thinking they're thinking deep and deep intellectual thought, who are thinking nonsense, stupidity, like entertainment addicted slaves is what we are. Take my money, take my attention, As if we don't know that all of the tech world, that they're not trying to make money, they're trying to get attention. It's called the attention economy. And if they can get all of your attention, if they can get you scrolling, they can get you addicted, they can get you hooked, then they got you. That is the new slavery, is an intellectual slavery. And the way that they get you into it is through entertainment addiction while the whole world is burning. While they are looting Africa for cobalt, rubber, gas, natural gas. Keep going down the list of all the things: diamonds, gold, all kinds of minerals, blah, 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 blah. Did you hear what Drake and Kendrick said last week? Yeah, I did. They said nigger, 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 nigger is what they said over and over and over and over again to a cool beat that you loved. What's that got to do with cobalt? What's that got to do with the richest continent on planet Earth being called shithole countries by white supremacy world that we all live in, right? I'm sorry for this sermon at the end of what we're saying right now, but when I say that Malcolm lost, I don't think he lost. We lost him. We lost him. We lost the plot. We don't even know we're in a movie anymore, right? We don't know who the director is. We don't know what the script is. We don't know who the publisher and distributor are. We don't know any of that. We're in the middle of somebody else's strategic plan. We're in the middle of somebody else's movie, and we don't even know it. We don't even know it. But did you hear what happened with Kendrick and Drake last week? Yeah, I'm sure you did. Sorry for the sermon, y'all.
No, listen, it's so often that, we agree and we just, on so many levels. And I think we talk about it differently, but, it's essentially the same, the same, issue. I also only know that there was beef because it was flooding my timeline, but I was not, curious enough isn't the right word. I wasn't distracted enough to go down the rabbit hole to figure out why. So I still don't know what they're beefing about. And I saw somewhere that said J. Cole did the smartest thing and stepped out. So I guess it was supposed to be a 3-man battle, kind of thing. And I would say this: if I was still in the school, I would ask a kid, what is the thing? Because I always wanted to be, understanding how they're thinking about things, So I'm a little bit further, but during Freedom School, I'm sure I'll be like, hey, what was all of that about? Right? Like, just to get their perspective, just to understand, not F them, but more or less around, I want to know what my youth are thinking about, how they're thinking about, what's infiltrated, what are they resisting, just how they're seeing the world. And so for me, that part is critical. Not the beef. How are my kids thinking and talking about the beef? Matter of fact, I need to ask my daughter, because I haven't even spoken to her about it. You know what I mean? We're talking about like what HBCU she wants to go to. That's been the part of our conversation, and her track season and all those kind of things. But I do this weekend. I need to like sit down and, hey, how are you are you even processing and thinking about it at all? And if so, and if not you, how are your friends talking about it? Right. So I think for me, all of that kind of distracting stuff, because how you laid it out is absolutely right, and that is the world, and it's always been right. Like, most people are talked about as if they're sheep, and not to belittle human beings, but it is groupthink. It is, what are we all thinking about? What are we all talking about, right? And like, that is the part of like getting people to wake up, right? And that's what Malcolm used to say, is like, the first thing to do is to wake people up. Like, that's your first job, is to talk to them, engage them. And you can only wake them up by loving them, talking to them, but also knowing what's doping them up. What is doping them? You have to understand the dope in order to help them detox, right? And you asked earlier, what was the nation? So the Nation of Islam was one of the best organizations to detox human beings. You're talking about like Kensington. If we had the Nation of Islam of old to Kensington, Philadelphia, that joint would be tight. People would be wanting to step out of that addiction and all the different layers, because that was the nation what was talking about. It was like, you're addicted to all these things. You're addicted to eating. They would eat once a day. It's like, you're addicted to alcohol. Don't drink. You're addicted to heroin. Like, it was like, you hear all the things. You're addicted to thinking that you are subservient, and that you being Black is a curse. Well, no, it is God's creation and its beauty, right? Like, and so I think that's the only thing. So I agree. I think I would just come at a different angle. Just again, for me, it's the youth. And like, okay, how do I understand this? Because they are being exposed and to it. So how do I understand it? How do I engage in them with it?
Y'all know how there's a story in the Bible of Jesus goes in the temple and overturns the money tables?
That's
and
right.
kicks out the money people.
It's like, yeah, I'm
right?
coming with a sword. You know what I mean? I'm coming with the sword.
I feel like if Malcolm were alive today, looking at everything I just said, he would want to overturn the money tables. I feel like he would want to go into the temple and overturn the whole thing.
I think he was doing that anyway, right? He was already overturning, like, that was his nature. That's what he was here to do. That's exactly what he was here to do. And it was it's interesting in the Quran, we're talking about like his dead, and it goes back to like what I was gonna say earlier about him losing or being dead. And the Quran talks about like, people who are martyrs. And martyr is a bad translation. And sometimes we call him Shaheed Malcolm. Shaheed means martyr basically in English, but that's not actually what it means. When you're a shahid, you're a witness. So a shaheed is a witness to the truth. And in the Quran, it says the witness to the truth or the martyr, they're never dead. Don't even consider them dead, but they are alive. You're saying like that truth that they are witness, that teaching, that continues. As long as you taught somebody, that means they're teaching. Like the essence of why they were here was to speak truth, to be a witness to truth. And every time someone else whispers that truth or says it out loud or thinks it, that means that continues. That means it's not dead, right? That means it's not. So that's why in the Quran it says, don't even think about the witness bearer of truth as being dead. Lo, they are not. They are alive and sustained. And that is the work, that is the legacy, and that's why it will continue to endure.
Yeah, and just to go off of that, in 20 years, Malcolm will be more remembered than freaking the beef that you just referenced. But as an educator, as a teacher myself, I always went out my way to know what my students were listening to, so I can engage them in conversations about that. I mean, Sharif, you're spot on when it comes to. It's one thing to talk about it in a way, right? We sound like cantankerous old men a little bit, but then also at the same time, it's like saying that to the youth. Like help me understand what that means. Why is that so significant? What about the money in it? Like I think we seem to forget or don't acknowledge that a lot of the things that we know from our older age, that somehow we expect our children just to know off the strength. They need to grow also. They also need to learn. They also need to be exposed to different ideas. And if we're just dismissive of that without engaging them, and it took a student to teach me that. I used to always say, weak mills and flake and all this. Yeah, the students, and one student said to me one time, he's like, yo, Jimenez, I know what you're saying. He's like, but you need to understand that you're just like pushing us away when you do that you have to understand why this matters to us. And so that's when I learned as an educator, and this was early in the game too. Shout out to Keanu, who put me on to this in my second year of teaching. Ever since then, I went out my way to listen to the music, to watch the videos, to critique it, to point out examples, maybe put on a Malcolm clip when critiquing it, to bring home the point and the idea of the overall message of what Malcolm was trying to convey, when he was alive, and how the followers and the children of Malcolm are still trying to convey to the youth, right? And we can't lose sight of that. And as long as we're in that conversation, intergenerational, across class, I think that we're in a good position. Now, do folks need to step up their game and have a spine? Yes. And I think there's many folks who get lost in that and don't embody Malcolm's legacy, want to use the image and use even some of the radical language. But at the end of the day, it's like, so what do you do? Who do you talk to? Like what children, who are your mentors? Who are you a mentor for? And see, when you start to have those questions, when you start to get into those details, that's how I know. And that's what I think Sharif is definitely saying too, that this is still here, man. And it's alive and kicking. And there's a lot of promise going forward. We just got to be very purposeful and very clear on the message that we're teaching our youth, and be very clear about where they're coming from and not dismissive of who they are or who they think they are.
No, I'll be dismissive. Anyways, so listen. Yeah, I want to end the show the way that I said we were going to do, which is I want to hear from each of you any of the myths that you can solve right now, or if someone's listening to this and this is a teachable moment, teach us what some myths we need to get out of our head about Malcolm. Before we do that, I do want to say this disclaimer real quick. When I give a sermon like that, I am not seeing myself as the example or as perfect, right? I am talking from the sign lines, seeing what I see. I'm talking about what I see. I'm not talking as if I have beat the system. I have a situation with my own kids where I feel like I could be that cantankerous old man that Sharif just said. Because, listen, Kanye was a thing for us, right? The more I would say, like I knew that it would just make them want to listen to Kanye more if I said anything bad about him. Now I think the dude is nuts. I think he's crazy, but it's still coming in my house, right? I've told this story a million times. Our super producer in the background, my oldest, came home with Nelly back in the day, one day. And I remember when he came home with Nelly, I was like, I have failed you. I have failed you as a father. I have failed you, my son. In a world of public enemies, you brought home a Nelly. It's getting hot in here. Anyways, so I'm just saying, listen, I'm not talking as if
none of us escaped that, man. I remember
I was listening to Public Enemy. I was listening to Paris, bruh. I was listening to the real hip hop. Come on, stop it.
Agreed. Yeah, everything from poor righteous teachers to PE to, I mean, it was a different genre, and it was different genres. So I think now the genres have shrunken or morphed in a different way. But I remember I had never heard of Juice WRLD, Ice Juice something until
I see,
until he died, and then having a conversation with my daughter about I had never even heard of it until then. And she's asking me, "Did you hear Juice died?" I was like, "It's rotten, it's spoiled. Like, what are you talking about? Like, throw it out. Like, get a new one." But she was talking about this person that she, was like, he's changing the. I'm just like. And then I listened to it. I'm like, I don't think he's changing, but it gave me insight as to like how anything. I mean, I'm with you. I mean, probably Ish is probably better at it with us. I mean, most of my engagement about was like trash talking, just like explaining why KRS and PE or way, way better. It is and introducing them to even folks like it's bigger than hip hop, was one of the kind of most things where I was like, listen to this. This is bigger than hip hop. What is that? And engaging in that. So, and I felt like my exposure was pervasive because it blasts everywhere. But I would say, one of the things that,
the myths, let's talk about the myths quick.
One is this idea that Malcolm was just preaching violence. He was actually preaching love, and I would say that's one thing. And the other piece is that people, for some reason, when you think about violence, you're thinking about like just separatists. They think Black nationalism is just separatist. He's actually talking a lot about unification. A lot about unification, internationally, nationally, across Muslims and Christians and non-religious folks. Like, he was talking about that so much, particularly, as Ish mentioned, the Organization for Afro-American Unity. People should really read his speech announcing OAAU and what all the messages that were contained in there is so powerful.
And I think, even at the end of his life, a lot of people like painted, oh, well, he went to Mecca and realized, there are white Muslims too and all this. Actually, if you read his last interview for Muslim Association 2 weeks before he was assassinated, he emphasized to him, well, I'm Black first, and then I'm Muslim. And see, like, oh, go ahead.
No, just to say, and it wasn't his first time to Mecca. Like, he only, people make it seem like it was once, and then that was it. That wasn't his first time there, you know what I mean? But it's flattened. So many stories are flattened. Some of it's for efficiency, but some of it is because people don't know.
Exactly. And that's one of the myths, right? And it's perpetuated in the Spike Lee movie. It's perpetuated, with just like general dialogue, like folks who know more than just like Malcolm versus Martin type of narratives, right? But even there there was multiple layers. And I think that is one of the biggest myths. Also, Malcolm's need or an emphasis on international solidarity. I think that a lot of folks don't recognize that Malcolm was an anti-imperialist in the Nation of Islam. He talks about these rice farmers are going to be beating the biggest empire in the world with nuclear weapons. They didn't got a chance against these folks. And he recognized that. And I think that throughout his life, that narrative has been taken away and then placed in just in, oh, well, in the Nation, he hated white people. And then he went to Mecca and saw white people. And then he became different. And then he died. And it's like, well, there's a lot of details within that story that you're just like completely leaving out. But leaving out those details allows the mythology in which you were just talking about being just simply violent, right? Or being a separatist in a very, simplistic way. When Malcolm read newspapers ferociously, was very aware of international politics, even in the Nation, even after the Nation, right? Even to the point where when he did visit Africa first in the 1950s, afterwards, Elijah Muhammad forbade Malcolm from going back to Africa because how much of an impact that he was having, and even probably seeing the signs that Malcolm's thinking was changing. So like when we're talking about this reality, I think when we get to that point, you start to really, the whole mythology collapses on itself, and you get to see Malcolm for what he was, our shining black prince, willing to dedicate his life, put up his life. I'm sorry, I'm quoting Nazi Davis, right?
The eulogy,
the
bro.
eulogy.
Our shining black. Have you ever seen him smile? Has he ever smiled at you? One other thing I would say, I don't know if it's a myth, but I would also say that it's something that's not talked about, are the black women who poured into Malcolm. Like, that's one of my favorite, that's something my parents would talk about a lot. Like, yeah, you hear Malcolm, you see the man, but like these black women helped shape him, from his mother, Louise, his sister, Ella, his wife, Dr. Betty, and I look at Dr. Ilyasa Shabazz as one of his 6 daughters, who's channeling all of that and continuing the legacy of her parents through the Shabazz Center. We want to really push and shout people out, like people, let's support our institutions like the Shabazz Center in New York. It is such an important part of the legacy of the teaching and our future. Right? Like, we have to support our institutions. So I would also just say the black women that help form and shape Brother Malcolm, that's also a deep, deep reservoir of lessons and learning that we should tap into consistently.
Dan, I think you already hit on what I think the biggest kind of myths about him are, but it's that he was violent, and that he was wildly violent, and that that to me just seems like what the system does is that they recast everything so they turn your love into violence. So he actually loved his people so much, and he had such a vision for us being free, that he created an entire new vocabulary and intellect around that. But it was recast by Americans as being he was militant and violent and angry and hostile and all those things. And now you have people who don't know very much about him, but that's the mental image that they have of him. Like, they don't know very much. All that we just talked about would be new to them. But they do have a mental model of what they think about him, and that is a negative one. I'll end with this quote from him. He says, "One of the first things I think young people, especially nowadays, should learn is how to see for yourself, excuse me, and listen for yourself and think for yourself. Then you can come to an intelligent decision for yourself. If you form the habit of going by what you hear others say about someone, or going by what others think about someone, instead of searching that thing out for yourself and seeing for yourself, you will be walking west when you think that you are going east. You will be walking east when you think that you are going west, which means you won't know I'm just gonna leave it alone. Let the brother have the final word on that one. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you're still not free, but hopefully you're freer after this hour with Ish, Sharif, and me. We will see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening.